This is a lesson on invisible disabilities. We have covered some of them in separate lessons, but here we will try to put it all together and talk about common issues. We'll cover learning disabilities, psychosocial disabilities, behavior issues, sensory issues, and so on. People with invisible disabilities, they are also called hidden disabilities, may have a very different impairment, but their experience might be the same. First of all, the majority non-disabled society finds it hard to believe that they are disabled unless they have a medical diagnosis like deafness, because it's just not visible that they are disabled. Second, the majority society often misinterprets the symptoms and thinks people with invisible disabilities are lazy or slow rather than having a chronic fatigue syndrome, that they do not know how to behave rather than having an attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or autism, that they are less intelligent rather than having a learning disability, and so on. Some invisible disabilities are extremely hard to diagnose, since no specific test exists that would measure their difficulties. For example, autism, depression, or ADHD are measured through a variety of tests, interviews with the person or their family, and observations, all of which can be subjective and very dependent on an individual situation and personal characteristics. Now, here is a statement from someone with autism, and this tells you how people with invisible disabilities such as autism may experience the world. Judith Bluestone, who wrote a book, The Fabric of Autism, wrote, "You may look perfectly normal, but imagine yourself with weak focal vision and poor proprioception of three-dimensionality. Your hearing doesn't filter out extraneous sounds. Your tactile systems feel stifled when air moves across your skin. You are about to enter a space where someone may touch you, where lights and sounds may assault you, where you may be asked to sit up straight or walk slowly when your muscle tone and balance cannot support those activities. You may be yelled at or demeaned because you can't process the information and respond appropriately in 2 seconds. You do not know what to expect, and everything makes you afraid. You are not safe either physically or emotionally, yet you need to feel safe before you can accept your new surroundings. Safety is essential for us." People with invisible disabilities experience information that they receive from the environment differently, and their senses can integrate it altogether or disintegrate the person. They also learn things differently. They might learn differently how to read or write, behave, be self-sufficient, and often need extra help or strategies to accommodate their needs. Um, Very often they might have sensory overwhelming in those following areas: hearing, sight, smell, taste, touch, vestibular system, proprioceptive system, or gravity. There are many types of invisible disabilities. Most of them belong to a specific group or under specific diagnosis, but there is no official diagnosis of an invisible disability. So, invisible disabilities include psychosocial disabilities, deafness, learning disabilities, developmental and intellectual disabilities, and then physical disabilities such as cancer, allergies, AIDS, and many others. They also include visual impairments if they are corrected by lenses, you kind of notice that, sitting disability caused by chronic back pain, chronic illnesses like epilepsy, colorblindness, or diabetes, eating disorders such as anorexia or bulimia, sleep disorders, chronic fatigue syndrome, and others. Psychosocial disabilities, for example, include depression, mania, schizophrenia, psychosis, fatigue syndrome, anxiety disorders, suicidal behavior, and others. We have already talked about them in a separate lesson. But what happens and what is a common thing for people with invisible disabilities is that their partners and friends often underestimate the seriousness of such disabilities, like depression, schizophrenia, and others, if they do not know the cause. Psychosocial disabilities have good days, or people with psychosocial disabilities have good days and bad days, ups and downs, and they are not constant and unchangeable. Usually they get treated by drugs and visits to a psycholog or psychiatric hospital. However, some people may like to spend some time in an institution, such as a psychiatric hospital, when they feel that they can be dangerous to themselves or to others. Now, here is an issue in institutions. Restraints such as straitjackets, electric shock therapy, or cage beds are not allowed nowadays in most countries. However, isolation and medication with strong sedatives is okay. Do you agree with that? There was a case in my home country in the Czech Republic because we were still using cage beds in 2004, I believe. And Joan Rowling, the author of Harry Potter, publicly protested against it. However, in Britain, where she is from, they use strong medication for patients to calm them down. So my question is, what do you think is better? What do you agree with? What should we be doing? Which way should we go? Now we already talked about deafness in a previous week, and deafness and hearing impairments are also invisible until a person needs to communicate and use hands or pen and paper, and you notice that there is something different about them. We talk about how deaf people form a strong cultural and linguistic community and often do not consider themselves disabled. In fact, they are only disabled in interactions with the hearing society. Among other cultures, deaf people, they have no handicap. I was once waiting for a train, and a woman started running towards the train, and there have been a public announcements repeatedly, do not enter the train will be moving, do not enter the train. So everyone was waiting, and the train started very slowly moving, and this lady comes running, and she is very desperate trying to get onto the train, and people are yelling at her, do not get on the train, do not get, it's moving. They're just shifting it, and she's not reacting to it and just trying to open the door and very frantically. And then at that moment I realized that she might be deaf, and I ran to her and I started signing with her that they are just shifting the train not to get on. So she calmed down and waited. But that is a good example about how deafness is an invisible disability, and it is only a disability if you're in a hearing society and you cannot hear what is being announced on a speaker, for example. Now, learning disabilities. Today, almost about 10% of children are labeled with learning disabilities in schools, and what before would be labeled as less intelligent and not smart kid, nowadays most often is diagnosed as a learning disability of some kind. There's several kinds of them. Dyslexia is difficulty in reading, dysgraphia is difficulty with writing, dyscalculia is difficulty with counting and math, dyspraxia is difficulty with motorics, dysorthographia with grammar, dyspynxia with drawing, dysmusia with music and singing. There's also learning disabilities that affect language and communication, and very often they get combined with behavior issues. Because if you are not doing too well at school learning and writing, you might have, in addition to that, some behavior issues, because it is frustrating for you to learn, and that's what's the emphasis at schools. There's a wonderful website, ldonline.com, if you are interested in learning more about learning disabilities. It is designed for teachers and parents who have students or children with learning disabilities, and there's lots of advice on assistive technologies, how to diagnose learning disabilities, how to support children, and so on. Here's an example how to teach them to write and read. People with dyslexia have a hard time learning letters the usual way, when we say M is for mom and B as a ball, or as in ball, but they just don't hear that. But they could remember H as train tracks, because if you look at train tracks, the shape of train tracks is like a ladder made of H, the letter H, so there's lots of H's, and for example, and then they can see that, they can remember that visually, and remember that the letter H is like train tracks. Or another example is that V is like a flying bird. They might not remember that V is like village, but V is like a flying bird because it's more visual for them. Developmental and intellectual disabilities are usually of a neurological origin that appears before the child is born. So theories of bad mothers and wrong parenting are all false. They include autism, intellectual disability. Uh, this term might be replaced with difficulties in learning. We'll see what happens in the future, or psychosocial disabilities too. We'll see what happens. Um, they can also include short-term memory loss, cerebral palsy, epilepsy, and so on. As children grow and develop, they might be behind in some areas but advance in others. Often children have issues with time and place recognition, social interactions and relationships, with play, communication, or behaviors that are different from what we consider the norm. But what is normal and what is normal, quote unquote normal, is socially constructed, so only valid for our time and our society. If you take what we define as normal and put it in a different environment and different time period in different country, it would not be quote unquote normal anymore. Most people think of wheelchair users when they hear the word physical disability. We talked about the wheelchair user sign for accessible parking, but physical disabilities, which can be another type of invisible disability, can include most diseases, allergies, and conditions that are not visible to an eye, such as high blood pressure, diabetes, cancer, and so on. If a condition lasts more than 3 months, we talk about a chronic disability. Physical disabilities can be often fluid. They sometimes, just like with psychosocial disabilities, people sometimes feel better, another day they feel worse, they have ups and downs, and their individual experience is essential to the understanding of non-disabled others. Smell is another thing that is invisible, and a lot of people have sensory disability that affects sense. They are very sensitive to odors, especially toxic ones like perfumes. So we need to know what to do about that, otherwise we wouldn't notice that. What we can do though is to avoid using scented products like shampoo, lotions, lip balms, soap, and so on. You can also use and buy unscented products that are available today. Behavior issues that might be invisible first, but then when the behavior kind of comes up, you will notice that they will include hyperactivity and attention issues, impulsiveness, problems with attention. They're often diagnosed before the age of 3, but more often in the school years. What is striking is that they are diagnosed more frequently in boys than girls, and also more in African American people. Does that strike you, or do you think that is true? ADHD and its treatments have been controversial since the 70s, and especially the uses of medications such as Ritalin has been controversial. You can just read this slide. I'm not gonna read it, but that's an experience, again, by someone with autism about sensory overload, how everything that we think is okay can be an overload for people with sensory issues. Here's some pictures on how to help people organize themselves. You can break tasks into small pieces and make a lot of things visually. Here's an example how to brush teeth. And here's some other strategies such as fidgets and corners for breaks, and taking breaks, and using squeeze things for sensory relaxation. To help students with autism and behavior issues, you can use visuals, use child's fixations to motivate them for schoolwork, use weighted vests, protect them from sounds, teach with tactile learning things, and so on. And at the end, I would like you to look at an article and also think whether you know some people around you who have an invisible disability, and maybe even you may have one, such as your vision might be not as good. So tell us about you, and then here is a link to an article. You don't have a box, understanding hidden disability using narrative research methodology. So enjoy.